Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Santa Monica, California, United States of America, here on Memorial Day in America. Today's talk, an unconventional prayer for permanent peace. So may I invite you into that sacred place today of honor, of remembrance, of women and men all throughout history, not just America, who have chosen to engage in armed conflict, in armed battle, in war, to struggle for democracy, freedom, the sanctity of shared peace, mutuality, a prayer, an unconventional prayer for those women and men who have died. And inevitably, those men and women who will continue to choose to fight the good fight, to turn back the machinations of evil, of darkness, of war, of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of persecution, xenophobia, racism, apartheid, rape, individual and collective. Those women and men who choose to enter that arena to fight, to preserve the sanctity of decency and dignity and the universality of human rights. A very challenging topic for me. May I just extemporaneously today explore with you, with me, this challenging topic and offer collectively, may I invite you to join me, to bring our friends into this digital, global, sonic prayer for permanent peace, and do all that we can through the power of our mind, the power of our emotions, the power of our dedication to the highest values of what defines our integrity, the marrow of our dignity, our conscience. May I invite you to share this video, to share your own prayers, your own comments as you share it, and do all that we can in our own way, not only today, but throughout our lifetime, to fight in our own chosen manner, sometimes physically, sometimes psychologically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes existentially, not give up on the necessity that our freedom innately involves us in the responsibility to support and protect the freedom of others. For whatever reason, beyond me, we are born into this world known collectively as planet Earth, in a solar system, in a galaxy, in a universe. It is obvious to all of us at this point in time that denigration, violence, the challenging psychologies and emotions of racism, of propaganda, xenophobia, idealism, fascism, totalitarianism, dictatorship, evil, satanic behaviors based on deeply toxic, inbuilt emotions within the psyche, force upon us convulse upon us, avalanche upon us, tsunami upon us, war upon us, rape upon us, genocide upon us, layer after layer throughout history, this notion of war. And here we are today on Memorial Day, globally, not just in America, an unconventional prayer to elevate within our own ability a conviction in the restoration of peace and the promise of it being permanent on this precious planet of ours, if it's possible, a dedication to that vocation. Not just the vocation of harmlessness and nonviolence, but a dedication to the courage required to fight the good fight when required. Opening. Thank you for joining me today. Nice to have you, nice to see you, nice to feel you. May I invite you to occupy that place inside of your heart and mind that makes this sharing a shared meditation. What I mean by that is that we take the words from the atmosphere of shared space and do all that we can to, as our lungs breathe oxygen, oxygenate our ideas with the experience of transformational awakening. So that the prayer isn't just cognitive or thought, but it actually is a deep internal process of abiding within the meaning, the felt experience of peace in action, of love in action, of compassion in action, of courage in action. Our lives are an expression of a dynamic vocation of inner and outer beingness called living through our thoughts, living through our speech, living through our actions. We are action-oriented beings. And so may I invite you to make this meditation today a poem, a prayer, a song, a hymn, a cry, a weep, a wink, a handshake across the divide of time, from time immemorial to an eternal future. May our lives today influence all lives everywhere in this cosmos for permanent peace. Many of you know, but I'll refresh my own life memory. I grew up in a military family. My grandfather was a veteran of World War I, a Marine. My mother and my father, both veterans of World War II. I grew up for the first 11 years of my life being up and down the east coast of the United States in a 30-foot trailer, moving from military installation to military base. It was what I knew. My friends were Marines. They were Army soldiers. They were Navy representatives. My father was on aircraft carriers, battleships. He trained to be a pilot, eventually became a chief mechanic of aircraft and jets. I remember growing up on these bases. I remember being on these incredibly intense areas of America where people who were being trained to live and breathe the vocation of the military, a defense unit that often was sent to war. Just pause and just look at all the various wars that we have been in, only in America, but also in the world. World War I don't know how many people died in that. Was it 50 million, 70 million? Just look at the reign of terror with Mao and Stalin, Lenin, Pol Pot. I was born in 1951, the year before the Korean War, for 3 years, till 1953. A footnote in human history, 1950, the Communist Party of China, Mao Zedong invade the Tibetan plateau, 2.5 million Tibetans lost into the history of war, savagery, domination. Who could even remember parts of the Vietnam War growing up for me in high school? The inevitability of being drafted into this war. I couldn't even spell Vietnam. I had no idea what were the machinations of communism. I had no idea or trust in the American war machine, except both parents were military veterans. My brother was in a military academy. It was incumbent upon me to grow up and to stand up for America. And yet it was against everything in my fiber, especially as I turned on to the psychedelic metaphor and turned on to the revolution of love and music with Hendrix. Everything in me did not want to go to war. I did not want to kill in the name of anything. It was so anathema to my fabric, to my heart, to my mind. And yet there was this convulsion shaping me into being an obedient American citizen standing up for the good cause, the good fight. Many of us know that. How many friends came back in caskets? Always on the 6 o'clock news, being anointed with the terror of how many deaths. Always growing up with that fear, no matter what the horizon had, that upon graduation, before or just after, you will end up killing human beings in the name of. Here it is today, Memorial Day, decades later. The Vietnam War, was it from 1955 to 1975? Was it 2 million North Vietnamese that were massacred by American bombs and combat soldiers? 52,000 Americans killed in that war. A senseless war. What's the point of war? I ask myself today, I ask you to ask yourself, to ask our friends and family. I ask the past, I ask the future. Is war really necessary? Are we caught in a collective narrative? Yes. Are we caught in a collective narrative through historic toxins that we cannot, as a species, as a planetary, global, intersecting life form, cannot for the life of us figure out how to decode from the psychology, from the emotions, from the existential tendrils of eternity? We cannot decode the blinding, invenerating energy to violate in the name of an idea. Are we innately a warring species, a dominator cult species? Are we destined to be a genocidal plague on planet Earth in this cosmos? It looks like it. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the massacre of the Tibetans, World War I, World War II. Who could say enough about the massacre of the indigenous people all throughout the world? Native Americans, indigenous people in Australia, in Canada, in Europe, in Africa, in South America, the poles, all throughout history. The land is soaked in the blood of men and women, animals, birds, trees, mammals, all living things, primarily the human species, the Homo sapien, the cultist Homo sapien, dedicated to the preservation of its ego and its pride and its delusion, loves, relishes, delights in the perversity of domination, killing, and murder. And yes, there are good wars, but war is not enough. We as a species, we as a planet, we as people committed to the sacred vocation of the transformation of consciousness. The prayer today has to become a deliberate action over and over and over again to remove our complicity with evil within our own mind and body. The dedication of the yogi, the dedication of the meditator, the dedication of the holy savant who wishes to embody their Christ goddess, to make good on the harmlessness of the heart. But yet again, who's going to protect us? What army? What police force? It's a conundrum of existential proportions. Can we have permanent peace? Pause, just chill. Where are you going with this? Where do you want to go with this? I am so in my heart sickened by violence, aren't you? So disgusted, despicably turned off by the vocation, the proud flag flying vocation of the legitimacy of domination. And in our own countries, in our own cultures, the concept of forever wars, that our President Biden was very much an instrumental voice. Look at the videos online of that man in the Senate imploring other men and women in our elected officials to fight a lie in Iraq. Pause. What is a permanent prayer? I wrote a book called Extinction X-Rated. In it, the theme, the ethos, the passion of it was a my personal, in my own capacity, my own human vulnerability, my own creative imagination, to conceive of a conversion therapy, if you will. A prayer was not enough. A conversion therapy of non-violent means that could address the pestilence in our collective consciousness known as toxic masculinity, toxic patriarchy, the pestilence of predatory behaviors, the pestilence of priests and politicians, pedophiles, politicians. There's something that we can identify if we really, really look deep into the core of the psyche, into the subconscious. Where are you, psychonauts? Where are you, existential psychotherapists? Where are you, deeper yogis that want to go into the collective and find means before we destroy the planet and all life, so that all of a sudden our existence is completely forgotten in the epic eternal silence of nothing? We'll have nothing to show. There'll be no legacy of our words, our books, our loves, our memorabilia. Nothing if we do not stop killing in the name of. How to do that, right? Building war machines and ships and nuclear weapons and digital warfare and unrestricted forms of war. Right now, we're so vulnerable. 1 nuclear power plant, 2 nuclear power plants, Chernobyl, Fukushima. Imagine if 5 or 6 of them went off and all of a sudden we're living under the radiation cloud of a nuclear strike. Are we just a second away from that doomsday clock? Take a look online. I wrote about it in my book, The Doomsday Clock in Chicago, originated by the Nobel laureates and scientists post-World War II, post-Hiroshima, post-Nagasaki, post-Holocaust, post-20 million human beings, post-World War II, a memorial, a sonic hymn, a prayer. Tick, tock, tick. All these words, all these thoughts, all these ambitions, all these machinations of the ordinary. We want to turn away so quickly from violence. Very few people want to stick their heart and head and their cognitive intentions, their deepest sense of global peace, permanent peace, a prayer for permanent peace, just words on the empty canvas of hope. Our icon of nonviolence, Aung San Suu Kyi, sits behind an unknown location, blindfolded and taken before an Orwellian tribunal, sanctioned by Xi Jinping of China and Putin in Russia, and the world basically drinks and dines and sends out press releases of don't do that kind of thing. It's like watching a young girl be gang raped and you send a press release. Prayers are not enough. Commemorations are not enough. We need someone, people, collective, to step up in such a way to reinvent the intensity, just like LSD obliterates cultural narratives in the propaganda of separateness and explodes one's narratives to higher horizons of engagement, the life that you thought that you were living, and all of a sudden you find yourself, oh my God. Pause. We need a prayer that is so OMG, a creative, psychedelicized, nibbānified, enlightened, collective, digital, trans-existential genome meme. We need to conceive of a trans-artificial intelligent wave that goes through the psyche of all and removes from this genome of shared consciousness evil. If I can identify that, and you can identify that, the prayer, the unconventional prayer today isn't just may all beings be happy and live in the narrative of those kind of superficial thoughts repeated so that I can become concentrated and feel the joy of a focused mind. We need to be so skillful. Artificial intelligence, what is organic, psychic, intuitive, transformational wisdom intelligence that takes the unconventional prayer and goes, let's conceive on the tapestry of cognitive dharma creative activism, a creation, a sonic wave, an existential meme that has the capacity, the function, like nibbāna, once felt or breathed, an inhalation, a digital facial recognition app, gone. We've got to conceive of that and not play it safe with meditation and yoga and prayer alone and hope that the holy forces of the higher order existence of God, of Jesus, of Avalokiteshvara, all the various ways in which we understand higher order intelligence, we ourselves, men and women, boys and girls, we must seize the moment, carpe diem, right? And figure out a collective way to reimagine what we can do as activists on the stage of the collective, to think ways, to create waves, to create trainings and practices that address the evil genome, the pestilent of toxic masculinity. I'm not saying it's confined to men alone. Toxic dominator masculinity. That is the core concept. It's a predator, a dominator, the dinosauric. Evolution sucks. We need rapid, instantaneous evaporation of the pain, of the evil. Trust me, if we had a way to grab the psyche and the subconscious of Ming Online in Burma today, and collectively with Xi Jinping in China and Putin and every dictatorial gene in every mind and body on the planet, if we had that capacity to throw a meta-detonation bomb that had the capacity, like nibbāna, like in the Buddhist tradition, a cognitive miracle called the arhanta gene, meme, and all of a sudden you breathe it, and all of a sudden you've removed from your own mind evil. Why is that such a far-fetched idea? An unconventional prayer for permanent peace. I am done with war. I am done with violence. And I think until there's enough, we are done. We are done. Until there is enough that we are really done, we'll continue to perpetuate the cycle of violence, begetting violence, and war will always be a permanent wave in the fabric of existence on our own precious planet until we no longer have a planet to preserve and where prayers will no longer be even appropriate or needed. I was in Bali a couple of years back, a couple of trips back, and I was living near what's known as the monkey forest. And those of you who've been to Bali or Ubud, you know that monkey forest is an area in Ubud, the upper mountain village town And there are lots of monkeys in this incredible forest. Now, where I lived on a bungalow with a set of bungalows on this property, not too far away from the perimeter of monkey forest, inevitably, those of you who know, the monkeys in their pods, and they live in pods of 6, 7, 10, 12, with rotating alpha males that I'm told that females pick. Now, I'll qualify what I'm saying here and make relevance to this in this permanent prayer for permanent peace and overcoming violence and predator toxicity and masculinity and all the various things that go down with predators and pedophiles and priests and politicians and so on and so forth. And I met a woman who had dedicated her adult life, get this, to not only the study, the behavioral, psychological, scientific study of monkeys, the consciousness of monkeys, but the consciousness of monkeys in monkey forest in Ubud. And we became friends. And not only was she like a Carl Jung of behavioral psychology of monkey consciousness, but she studied one particular pod for close to a decade. Just followed this pod around, and there she was. I saw her in the rice field as the pod was gallivanting through the rice field and jumping into the trees and coming yet again into our large bungalow compound. And there she would be with her little walkie-talkie and her iPhone documenting, and we talked and we became friends over the months, and she explained to me. Let me just back up here. These monkeys, if those of you who know that are on the perimeter of monkey forest in Ubud, these monkeys are rabid. They attack, they growl, they got the biggest, wildest, vicious teeth. The masculine male toxic heads of the pods, they're aggro. I mean, mean MFs. And you have food anywhere. You're even thinking of a papaya. You think of the word banana, and they're in your room with their hand around your neck, squeezing your mouth. Get that banana out of your consciousness. I want to eat it, or I'm going to take your head off. They are super uber aggro. And you know, you see these tourists that come in from various countries going in busloads into the monkey forests, and no humor intended, but they come out and they're cut and they're scraped and they're bleeding, and they've got, back in the day when tourism was actually happening in Ubud and Bali, there were all kinds of clinics around monkey forests where tourists would have to be medically supported from the cuts and bruises and tears of the monkeys who did not want to be force-fed by these tourists. They just attack. Anyway, a whole other story. And so I developed over the months before I met this woman a prejudice. It's like, God damn those asshole men, just like the American men or the European men or the Russian men or the Chinese men, the men who want to go to war, always reinforcing my belief. It's the men, the toxic men, the asshole men, kill, 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 Vietnam War, World War I, World War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Belize, South Africa. Men, 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 kill, 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 the desecration of the American Native Americans and the Aboriginals of men, 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 everywhere they wanted to go. They're white priests or they're murderers. And it's like I had this belief, God, if only the world could be rid of people like me, there'd be peace if there were only just women. That's my narrative. And I'd be walking in meditation or sitting, and all of a sudden I'd see king asshole, masculine, toxic, predator, head of the pod, male monkey looking into my room. And I could hear him, I could smell him, I'd look at him. He would look at me straight in the eyes and like that. And they're very Halloween in their evil. And I just kind of looked and sent my metta that did nothing except inspiring him to come in slowly, and he would grab something from my desk and run out and eat it. Now, eventually she told me, this was my idea, that they're always hungry, so feed them. She told me, which was very interesting, that in fact the monkeys were not hungry, but they were living in such overcrowded conditions in monkey forest that they lived with heightened anxiety, and so they left monkey forest as much as possible during the day to relieve themselves of the stress of overcrowding and the onslaught of human beings coming into their habitat. And it was like this causal relationship that opened me to something different than my bias, my unquestioned projection. I bring this up is that Memorial Day in this prayer for permanent peace, I think it's born from a narrative of an unquestioned projection that war and the glorification of war is innate to the planet, and that we must build weapons and train boys and girls to preserve our nationalism, our sanctity, and the perversity of that has gone such that we live in the lie of forever wars, and we've associated war with the sad, tragic notion of the preservation of democracy, and it's been coupled with the increase in weapons sales and profit, prestige and power and domination and slave labor and now resources. Kill to dominate, to enslave, and to steal. Just like the monkeys, I thought they were coming to steal my food. It was an underlying response to their inability to associate peaceful existence in their own habitat. I'm going to close here. This is decidedly a very unpopular topic, but so is murder, so is genocide, so are the 2.5 million people in Tibet that have horribly been dismembered, the families of all the people who have died. Throughout all wars, throughout all history, the grieving, the crying, the tears. I ask myself, what is the meaning of my life? Why live forward unless there's something to do with the end of violence? Let me close today. I left America determined to try to understand the core nature of my own consciousness. If they were doing these violent deeds, I too were capable of them. And until I understood the deepest proclivities of my own fear, my own greed, my own delusion, I would never know the root of my own capacity to violate. It would be very easy to judge Ming Online and Xi Jinping and Putin and even President Biden, any of our presidents throughout history. But I too could be responsible for the very thing that I judged them of doing. And so I entered the sacred country of Burma, and I entered a place called the Mahasi Satana Yekta. The word Yekta is very important here as I end today's sharing as a prayer. The word Yekta, as I understand it, as it was explained to me, is an abode, an environment, an outer environment to support the inner environment where the vocation of an inhabitant in that environment, both the outer environment and the inner environment, the inhabitant isn't a nun or monk, isn't a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni. The inhabitant, the human, abides by the vocation, the dedication to challenge in every way mindfully possible their own kilesas. Burn their kilesas, the yekta, the meaning of yekta, a place to burn, consciously burn one's own greed, one's own delusion, one's own proclivity to violate. When I think of the preservation of Myanmar, when I think of the preservation of Burma, the preservation of the 135 different ethnicities, the preservation of all the religions, the preservations of democracy, the preservations of the sanctity of the 54 million people in that country, I think of family. A family that gave me hope that nonviolence was a viable response to violence, that gave me the sanctity of a prayer that wasn't just words, but an environment. They gave me the gift of the yekta, and they gave me the gift of the transformational, timeless teachings of Dhamma, which are the embodiment of burning through one's own conscious ethical courage, one's own recognized and unrecognized kilesa, one's own greed, one's own fear, one's own rage, one's own delusion, one's own propensity to violate self and other. If there's ever a thing that I wish to be remembered for in this life, is simply the word Dhamma, the vocation, the embodiment of the intelligence, the timeless trans-religious, trans-Buddhist intelligence of radical self-responsibility to challenge mindfully, courageously, ethically, intelligently, any nuance of fear, greed, and delusion in one's own heart, one's own mind, in one's own speech, one's own thought. And go so deep, Alan, go so deep that you're willing to probe even the subconscious, the substratum, the very existential DNA that animates existence, all forms of life, wherever these configurations, these constellations or cognitive formations, these vibrational frequencies known as lobha, dosa, moha, they're only cognitive formations. They can be studied. They are not self. They're artifacts of whatever it is that we're embedded in called samsara. I will not speculate on the why. For me, it is beyond my capacity to understand the why, except they arise based upon unmindful association with conditions. And when I'm mindful of the conditions, I can relax the so-called attachment to them, and they fade like a fire goes out when there's no wood or no air. The kilesa is extinguished. It's burned. Meditation is the conscious act of sacred burning of kilesa, the absence of the need to violate, to dominate, to rape. Let's just pause right here. Today on Memorial Day, think of how many men and women, animals, the factory farms all throughout. Think, just feel what it would be like to honor all the humans, all the life forms that have ever died, been killed, murdered, raped, and genocidally decimated. If we can't collectively enter that reality and just stop our preoccupation with domination and violence and fear and rape and persecution and all these narratives, all these distortions. A year off from profit, a year off from the machinations of propaganda, the whole planet, all life forms dedicated to the vocation of Dhamma. MQ, mindful intelligence, SQ, spiritual intelligence, EQ, emotional intelligence, EQ, existential intelligence, transformational wisdom, the nibbāna meme. A prayer, a permanent prayer for peace. So as I end today, it's so easy to leave the holiness of our true vocation as humans, I should say, to go into the day-to-day errands, the day-to-day ways in which we behave. We are alive based upon the choices and the sacrifices of millions, hundreds of millions of people, literally, that have warred in the name of. I so want to run from this planet. I so want to run from the front lines of samsara. I so want to run away from war. I can't imagine a boy and a girl immolating herself and himself, and to suffer or endure the horror of burning flesh, to draw world attention to the horror of violence and war. It's unimaginable. And yet here we are today on Memorial Day with an unconventional prayer for permanent peace. Those girls and boys who've immolated themselves is a prayer. Not just the ones at the front lines of wars. And so may I invite you, may we burn our own interior kilesas. May we radiate and illuminate our power of love and compassion. And may I invite you to invite me, to invite our friends, to use our imagination to break the coma of dogma and religiosity, and to reinvent and to magically create sacred environments and formations that do everything humanly possible to elevate the status of peaceful coexistence. The coming days, God willing, I'm going to find creative ways to just jump out of my conventional box and address the psyche of the toxic, violent patriarchy in this world, this planet. Ming Online, I'm coming after you. Xi Jinping, I'm coming after you. Putin, I'm coming after you. Biden, I'm coming after you. Any men, any women in the world dedicated to the violence of other, I'm coming after you. My prayer is going to become very, very non-violently aggressive in its charm, to find creative ways to just jump out of the box and to play in the imaginative sacred field of, let me just say this, if there's ever an opportunity to have global legislation, I think anyone in a leader, any person in power should be put in prison for 30 days to see what it's like, should be stripped of their privilege and profit and be put into a refugee camp and to live and breathe and struggle with displaced people who have been violated, to openly volunteer without the privilege of profit and pay, the maimed, the hurting, of where you, if you were a leader, would initiate American violence and bombing. So you see where our ordnance, you see where our weapons that you sell to Saudi Arabia, to other countries around the world. You go into Palestine, you go into Israel, you go into Yemen, you go into Syria, and you there, Mr. Biden, forever war, Mr. Biden, you go there and you're stripped of your privilege. And now, at your age of life, you were there eating, working, living, crying, feeling of what it must be like to be there in your forever war. And then, Mr. Xi Jinping, and then, Mr. Putin, in your privilege, you will understand the mind and the cry of a Tibetan, a Chinese Uyghur, an incredible, heroic freedom fighter in the prison camps of mainland China, the dead in Korea, South and North, the earth that bleeds with our American Indians, with the Vietnamese. We must understand what we do in the name of that we can have done to us, and then I guarantee you we'll be motivated to stop our proclivity to kill in the name of democracy, in the name of freedom, and the next great freedom that we have in the world called global totalitarianism. We must stand up and fight the good nonviolent fight while there's still an opportunity before there is a shooting war. There's a reason why 7 aircraft carrier groups of the Americans are in the South China Sea right now. We are on the brink of a kinetic war. Memorial Day today is more important than ever. So from my heart to yours, thank you for being a part of my life. And I hope to see you, God willing, tomorrow, and in honor of all the freedom fighters forever in the past and forever in the future. Thank you.